We are live, Cherise.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the May webinar, where our theme is Ecosystem Corridors, a web of plant connection. I found so many amazing projects that I could highlight during these Botanical Society webinars that I think it's going to be my theme for the rest of the year. All the projects that are connecting our disconnected bits of biodiversity, all the pockets amongst all our neighborhoods and our felt areas. But this time I decided we could focus on birds. Next time I might do pollinators in general and reptiles, amphibians. We'll see how it goes for the rest of the year. But this lineup is absolutely fabulous tonight. Before we go any further, though, I think it's really important to say congratulations to everyone involved with our Chelsea Flower Show win. All those multiple awards, how much prestige has it brought us? Well done to Leon, his team, his volunteers, the sponsors, everyone involved. They've only made us proud at a time where many people overseas have their eyes on South Africa as we go through our elections. But just to say, that I had a very strong thought about that display, that pristine and abundant floral display with its iconic protea at the heart of it, really capturing the delight and attention of a huge international audience, as well as us at home. It does provide us with a wonderful and very important opportunity for us, particularly as Botanical Society members and as South Africans in general, to be able to highlight the critical plight of our biodiversity, to use all this focused attention to build awareness and garner support for our flora's conservation needs and for the efforts that the Botanical Society is putting in to saving our flora. So use that opportunity, be an ambassador. It's a fabulous chance for us to speak out. And having said that, CINWEN and Joel will be presenting first this evening on the sunbird restoration project that they run. Welcome to all our panelists. I'll be introducing you one by one. But for now, CINWEN and Joel, it's over to you. Thank you so much.
Carmen, you're muted. Just unmute.
So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. I will be speaking along with Joel about Ingungu sunbird restoration. I'm just trying to share my screen.
Your screen is up. You're all good to go. You can just proceed.
There we go. So tonight, Joel and I will be sharing some of the work that Ingungu sunbird restoration is focused on. But first, Ingungu. The name is isiXhosa for bird with a long beak, and it is also a word used to refer to royalty. And as this picture of a beautiful double-colored sunbird on the first slide shows, it's quite fitting with this long curved beak and these incredible iridescent colors that this name Ingungu is used to refer to them. So as Shireen mentioned, the plight of our biodiversity is a vital element of our work. And why sunbirds? Well, sunbirds are a very important pollinator for our fynbos, particularly the proteas and the ericas. And they play a very important role in connecting our landscapes. So as our tagline suggests, we will be speaking about connecting plants, birds, and people. Ingungu's vision is creating a stepping stone pathway across the Cape Flats. And what does this mean? Well, this means we focus in creating stepping stone gardens to create a pathway that birds can move across the landscape through the urbanized Cape Flats. And here you see an image of a map. The bottom left-hand corner highlights the yellow line is an area we're focusing in at the moment around Muizenberg, reaching into Steenberg and Lavender Hill and connecting Muizenberg Mountain to Rondevlei. Our long-term vision, however, is to connect this corridor, this pathway, all the way across to the mountains above Stellenbosch and Boland. How do we do this? Our mission is planting gardens for sunbirds, linking isolated patches of fynbos, and connecting schools and communities to nature. And this is a critical part of our work, which we will be really focusing on tonight, is without this connection, without engaging with learners and communities at schools, planting these gardens is only a very small part of the work, as we need these custodians to look after them. So how are we connecting plants, birds, and people? Our work is focused on 3 pillars. As I mentioned, we work in schools, so education, and we're working in community spaces as well. We work planting gardens, so we are doing rehabilitation work. And our work is focused and very much grounded in research. And this is not just around birds and the impact these gardens have on attracting birds, particularly sunbirds, but it is also on the social ecological impact of these gardens on a broader scale to the learners, the communities, and other wildlife in the area. These 3 pillars are sustained through strong partnerships with our multiple institutions and organizations that we rely on. So first, I wanted to introduce you to some of our work we did. We just completed last year, a project called Pollinating Pride in People. This was a COVID project which enabled us to work with community members with the view of promoting pride, a sense of pride in fynbos. And in doing this, we partnered with Amava Luntu and ran 2 parallel programs, one which Ingungu ran, the garden program, where we focused on planting gardens and learning about fynbos. And the other was an entrepreneurial program, which was inspired by fynbos. Through this project, we helped to plant 3 community gardens. We hosted more than 38 fynbos workshops and immersive walks in fynbos. And through a creative process of printmaking and design skills, the entrepreneurial program created a number of fynbos-inspired designs, and these were exhibited in 3 exhibitions and produced 2 murals. This project was focused in Muizenberg and Vrygrond, and a key element of the work here was to really look at creating a community of pollinators that we can move forward with creating this, achieving our vision of creating a corridor, a pathway across the Cape Flats, because we can't do this alone, and having champions to help us is a key element of the work. Some other work that we've done a few years back were focusing on another collaborative project, fynbos Corridor Collaboration. This was more creating. The intention of this was to create an online resource that could be used to really try and guide those who want to get involved in urban greening, but are not aware of some of the key guidelines and creating this as a rehabilitation process. So fynboscorridors.org is the website, and it has a lot of really helpful information, a stepping stone garden guide. There's information on vegetation types and the different species related to those types. There is a really helpful mapping tool where you can figure out where your patch, whether your garden or your community space is located and what vegetation type it sits on and how it is connected to potentially other stepping stone gardens. And there are species lists which can be searched and filtered by various means, including bird-pollinated species. This is a work in progress, and we do reach out to other organizations and invite those that would like to become contributors and help us to develop this as a resource. Another resource we developed was a high school workbook, a really practical guide on getting high school learners involved in conservation through involving the Princess Flay Guardians. And this was a collaboration with Princess Flay Forum, and it is a resource that's being used in their field trips and activities at Princess Flay, and we are using it in our high schools in collaboration with them. yes, so this work would not have been wouldn't be possible without the support of the Table Mountain Fund, who supported us in Fynbos corridor collaboration, and the Hans Hohausen organization, which supported the workbook. And over to you, Joel.
Cool. Thanks, Connie. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joel Simons. I manage the School Eco Club program. Right now, the Eco Club program is operating in 6 schools in somewhat of a cluster in Steenberg. Currently, we have 115 learners enrolled, and over the last 2 years, while I've worked for Ingungu, we've worked with 180 students. Over that time, we've done 120 school workshops, which take place primarily in the gardens, the indigenous gardens that schools have, as well as some indoor work. We've done 10 field trips to places like Kirstenbosch and Rondevlei and Intaka Island, and then also had the privilege of going on 2 camps up the west coast to Bokbai, which is a private nature reserve, a very lucky and beautiful experience for students. Part of the Eco Club program, we've seen a good, strong retention of learners staying in the club from year to year and throughout the year, and a very inclusive demographic with lots of young women joining the Eco Club, sometimes up to 80%. And then onto our Fynbos Gardens. So that comes hand in hand with our education. We have 11 locally indigenous gardens that we've planted, 8 of which are at schools, 3 in community spaces with a roughly 1,500 meters squared planted area. And in the planting and kind of custodianship of the gardens, we've involved 300 youth. We've begun working with community members and civic groups, especially in our most recent project, which I'll speak about, developed the plant list for sunbirds, and we've collaborated on these projects with different collaborating partners, particularly in the implementation of planting and designing the gardens. So as CINWEN said, another pillar of ours is research, specifically monitoring. So Ingungu began, it has its roots in research with Bongani Mnisi's thesis in 2017. Since then, we've seen a research journal paper in 2021, an honors project this year, and next year, the start of a master's and PhD study, which is planned. So the monitoring currently happens in the school gardens. It takes place on a monthly basis. And because of this, we are able to create long-term data sets for our gardens and the birds that frequent the gardens. And this has been going on for many, many years before I even joined Ingungu. And we do so also for our control sites, so we can monitor the sunbird populations prior to planting, during planting, and as the garden matures. A recent kind of update in the monitoring is that now students lead the monitoring activities at schools, which is great. So they are directly involved in quite established research work. And then finally here is the expansion plan. I'll speak to this map a bit. It's for the next 3 years. We plan to work in 2 more schools, creating 2 new eco clubs there. We plan to plant 3 new gardens, those being in schools and expanding through planting in our indigenous school gardens. And as you can see, it is somewhat of a cluster. I know you won't be able to get through the map completely, but represented are existing gardens as well as those which will be created and those will be expanded. With the topic of today, we have an interesting corridor connection that we are looking to create between our main big project this year, which is extending a 300 meter squared garden into what would be 1,200 meters. So it's new territory doing a garden that big, but we'd be connecting our kind of cluster to Princess Flay.
Great, thank you, Joel. So as I mentioned, we are really reliant on a dedicated group, a small team. This is us. and we're growing. As Joel mentioned, he joined us 2 years ago, and he really has brought an amazing repertoire of skills and enthusiasm and helping us to spread Ingungu's wings. And as we continue to grow and invite new researchers to join us, along with the 3 board members who are still involved from the beginning, there's Bongani and Anton and Shirk, we are very grateful for the continued support. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do the work without our funders and our education partners and conservation institutions. So yeah, just a big shout out to everyone involved. And we are excited to continue growing this partnership network into the new year. So how can you support? If you'd like to get involved, we'd love to hear from you. But if you have a garden space, a verge, if you're involved in a community garden, we really would like to inspire you to plant locally indigenous. And I think tonight we're going to hear lots of different, about lots of different plants that you can plant in your garden that are local to your landscape here in Cape Town or wherever you are, and that they are nectar rich. These plants provide food for sunbirds, and it's a much healthier alternative to a sugar feeder for a sunbird, as it's a full meal, as opposed to a fast food shot of sugar. So we really encourage you to do what you can in your own gardens. You can join our community action days, which we're going to be hosting more of in the node that Joel mentioned in the expansion map in Steenberg. So get in touch with us if you'd like to be involved. You can donate to our Backer Buddy. Here on the left is our school eco club's Backer Buddy, and we will be launching a new one for the Crestway Garden expansion next week. You can purchase the gift cards. Look out for them. We are hoping to have them in various stores and potentially Botsock branches soon. And follow and like us on social media. Here is our links below, and please feel free to get in touch. Thanks so much.
CINWEN and Joel, what a fabulous project. I know I haven't given anyone a very large amount of time to represent their projects, but you two did a fantastic job. I can't believe there have been 120 workshops already. That is some output, and amongst all the field trips and everything else that you've done. The map looks amazing. So thank you so much. Please, would you stay on to see if there are any questions? You can start to see in the chat people's reactions about your project, and just well done. It's close to where I live, so I'm going to see how I can get involved. I was at Princess Play just the other day, and it's looking really much better than it ever has. So Helen, it is now over to you and your project called the Bossies Project. Let's hear what you've got on the go.
Hi. Let me share first. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Hi, I'm introducing biodiversity on suburban sidewalks for indigenous ecosystem sanctuaries, which is the full name of the project I run. It's a mouthful, right? Fortunately, the acronym, why is it not moving? There we go. The acronym we know it by is much easier off the tongue. So I'm Helen Mitchell, and I'll be telling you about Bossies, its history, what it's all about, our vision and plan, and our progress to date, and finally, how you can get involved. So the story starts back in 2006 at a friend's locally indigenous sidewalk, this one, where the neighborhood was adopting the Bossies idea. I was pretty impressed. I had to find out some more. I then discovered that Sunflake Trust, Friends of Rondevlei, and the city had got funding to start a small nursery to propagate required Cape Flats dune Strandveld plants for these 7 specific sites that would create natural corridors to connect the mountain, the vlei, and the coast. and this project was called BOSSIS, the acronym BOSSIS, as I've explained. Then after I finished my studies 10 years later, in 2022, I had joined Fynbos Life, and we got the opportunity and the approval to revive the BOSSIS project as a Fynbos Life project, and this time with new and expanded educational focus, and to grow it throughout the city. So what is BOSSIS all about now? So BOSSIS aims to promote the planting of locally indigenous plants that are specific to the felt type of the site, that are attractively arranged and are grown locally at our Fynbos Life Nursery. And where we're planting these on our otherwise unused sidewalks and public open spaces, which are publicly accessible and would otherwise be typically poor in biodiversity and pretty often have to be mowed regularly by the city. And basically, the overlooked spaces with so much potential. And who's going to be doing this planting? Well, you, the concerned public, which obviously includes local communities, residents, youth groups, concerned citizens, and eventually, hopefully, everyone. Sorry, I hope you can't hear my cat. And why are we doing this? We want to create better functioning urban ecosystems with increased biodiversity, which include birds, of course, throughout the city, so that it can help conservation, to help with our health and well-being, to celebrate our natural local heritage, and to educate and inspire people to follow suit. So basically, the idea is to go from something like this to something like this, which supports much greater biodiversity and birds, of course. And more locally, from something like this along the Zandvlei coast to something like this. So in our big vision, centrally, the Fynbos Life felt circles are central, and Dr. Caitlin van Wit will probably be telling you more about those in a future webinar. And radiating from those, we will have the BOSSIS sidewalks and locally indigenous felt gardens and all of these other stepping stones spread out to create integrated networks of wild green spaces, forming a web of biodiversity stepping stones throughout each felt type across our urban environment. It's a bit like creating an urban ecological safety net, allowing fauna and flora to thrive throughout our city. So how do we plan to do this? We've started with running annual planting events in winter when it's the best time to plant. And with these planting events, we learn about the local indigenous plants with the BOSSIS name game, so it's educational. We do something to make a difference, so it's conservation action. We connect with our neighbors, and so it's community cohesion. We get our hands dirty, and so it's great fun. And hopefully, the idea of planting locally indigenous on our sidewalks will catch on. So I mentioned the BOSSIS name game. What is this thing? It was born out of a problem. For my first planting event, there was only going to be 15 minutes between the plants arriving and the people who were going to plant them arriving. And that was just too little time to place all the plants ready for the people to plant. And I have an injured back and that wouldn't have coped. So I came up with an alternate plan to make little info flags and place them in the ground ahead of time instead. And so was born what has now become the signature of Bossy's planting events. So these colored flags, I don't know if you can see, I don't know if my video is on, but these flags are colored to match the flower color or the foliage color, and have the plant name on the one side, the genus and the species, and on the other side, the first letters of the genus and species. I nickname it the plant's initials. And this makes it easier for even kids to find where things must go. And basically what we have is flag pairs, one in the plant and one in the ground where the plant has to go. And there are info boards that I make that tell people about the plants and whereabouts in the flower beds they can find them. And they can then know where to dig the hole to plant the plant. And this has been very successful in smooth running planting events, and everybody's enjoyed them, so they stuck. So what's our progress been to date? We've been running for 2.5 years, and we've so far planted up 3 sites all around the Sunflay estuary, which has the Fynbos Life Strandveld Circle on its shores. So the first site was the Westlake Gardens pavement, which was funded by Sunflay Trust, and its success has inspired further collaboration with Sunflay Trust for future garden expansion. The second one was on the corner of the entrance to the Scout base on Promenade Road, which, with thanks, was funded by the Botanical Society. And its thriving garden has inspired nearby residents to plan another site along an adjacent fence around the Sea Cadets. Then last year, we planted the verge outside of this complex in Marina. It was funded by the complex, and its attractive garden is already attracting birds and insects, and has also inspired the Park Island CID to request for multiple future annual planting events, which we're starting off with this year. And then this year, we're back at Westlake Garden doing a much greater garden revamp. Phased approach, started with phase 1, and we had our first planting event 2 weeks ago, and the next one this Saturday if the rain holds off. Also funded by Sunflay Trust, but specifically a bequest from Una Hartley, who started this garden originally. And its planting event last 2 weeks Saturday was great fun and stimulated much community connection. And there are another 2-3 sites planned for this year and future ones for the following years to come. So how now can you get involved and go Bossy's yourself? You can request a Bossy's transformation from us by identifying a site, gathering some community support, and raise some funds. And you can contact me on my email or at info@Fynbos Life. You could volunteer on already planned Bossy's planting days. We publicize those, advertise those on social media. You just need to follow. And you could always volunteer to join our team because we're growing. You could donate to Bossy's directly, and the details are on the Fynbos Life website. The URL is here. Otherwise, you can just go Bossy's yourself by planting local on your own sidewalk, or start talking about Bossy's with friends and family to spread the awareness. So in wrapping up, this being the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and with Cape Town being both the most diverse city in the world, as well as the extension capital of the world. There is no better time and place to become a Bossies champion. Thank you so much.
Helen, lovely, lovely presentation. And also a couple of things you said. The one that caught my eye the most was an urban ecological safety net. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that? And by the way, that's my dog in relation to your cat. So it happens, everyone. My apologies. And also your name game. I think it's such a brilliant solution because it means that anyone coming along, no matter that they don't know the plant or your plan, knows exactly what to do to be directly involved and lend a hand. Born out of, I'm sure, absolute desperation between your back pain and your time limit. But that's the time we are, as South Africans in particular, or most people, really creative. And what a great suggestion. If you don't mind, I think that might be used by a couple of other projects. It's just such
As
a great...
already.
Well, thank you so much. And we are on to our next presenters, Andre Venter and Francois CILLIERS. They're going to be talking about the Wildlife Stepping Stone project. Over to you guys. Francois, I believe you're going to be starting.
Hello, everyone. So greetings from the northern suburbs of Cape Town. Let me just share my screen here. So Andre and I are members of the Wildflower Stepping Stones project, which is a project that I guess is different in two ways. We're in the northern suburbs and we are the other part of the Cape Floral Kingdom, particularly focused on Renosterveld. So if we have a look at the area that we work in, we're working more or less between the Tygerberg Nature Reserve on the one end and then the Durbanville Nature Reserve on the other. We have stepping stones that stretch across 8 neighborhoods, 19 parks. We've got 2 major river corridors in our area, and we also have 2 road verges. So a lot of themes in what we're saying has already been covered, where you can do urban rehabilitation pretty much anywhere. So while we don't, as part of our project, work on the waterways, this is some of the waterways that run through our area. There's the Tygerberg Wetlands Association that are working on a particularly big area of wetlands here. But you can see that it's an incredibly rich area with both the waterways and then the urban restoration. So we are an entirely volunteer-driven project. There's a core group of people who run the project, and then we have recruited subgroups in the communities who we then support in their own particular areas, but everything is volunteer-driven. So when we talk about wildflower stepping stones, what we are talking about are these areas of locally indigenous wildflowers that are found in our parks, of which we have many in our neighborhood, and also along road verges, which we then try to permanently protect from mowing. And that in itself is a mission, because we have to coordinate with 3 different groupings within the city of Cape Town. But we've also got locally indigenous garden areas created in public open spaces to showcase the amazing local vegetation. And I'll show you a photo of our designed garden by a very famous Chelsea award winner. So what are we about? We are trying to conserve existing remnants of critically endangered vegetation in our neighborhoods, and essentially creating a habitat for local fauna and flora. So we're sort of starting at the bottom of the pyramid, if you will, conserving the existing local flora so that the pollinators, the reptiles, the birds, the raptors can come back in. And then also creating these ecological corridors for wildlife to ensure safe passage between the nature reserves and along these river corridors. So we have, for example, in our neighborhood, several sightings of a caracal, which we believe moves between the Tygerberg Nature Reserve and the Magic Forest in our area. So the idea with the stepping stones, if this is a sort of a schematic of a neighborhood, so the black are roads running through the neighborhood, the purple are public open spaces. The idea is to create these stepping stones wherever we find areas that are worth conserving, in the parks, along roadsides, along the river, and basically optimizing access for those pollinators, the seed eaters, the predators. And the ideal, we're told, is to have these within about 500 meters of each other. That allows optimal movement across the stepping stones. So we also aim to create interesting recreational and educational spaces for the community. So we have partnerships with different schools in the area. We have a group of learners from the Kuro schools who, between 10 and 30 learners every month, who come and help out with the projects. So we have outdoor classrooms that are used by the local schools and ECD centers. We are linking to curriculum outcomes and starting to inspire locally indigenous gardens at schools. And both between the schools and our neighborhoods, we are trying to raise awareness of the importance of urban biodiversity in our areas. So why do we do this? Well, our neighborhoods, we're blessed to have two critically endangered vegetation types, both the Swartland shell renosterveld, and we also have Cape Flats sand fynbos. But as you may know, renosterveld is incredibly endangered, with probably around 95% of what used to be in the Western Cape destroyed. And of the 5% that exists, only 1% of that is actively being conserved at the moment. So we're trying to counter the destruction, the fragmentation of this irreplaceable natural heritage, because, as you know, it doesn't occur anywhere else on the planet, and hoping through our preservation of the habitat, as well as later getting involved in the waterways, to promote a more climate resilient Cape Town and make our little contribution in our neck of the woods to the United Nations Decade of Eco-Restoration. We've got various activities that we get involved in. We create the stepping stones. I'll show you a little bit about that now. The locally indigenous gardens that we have in our area. We have seasonal no-mow areas where the spring flowers allow us to, we had a 6-kilometer walk through our neighborhoods for people last spring. And then, as I say, the school collaborations. And then in the background, there's a whole lot of enabling work that goes on, where we're working with community groups, schools, documenting what we see on the iNaturalist app, fundraising. We're not there yet, but working really hard with the City of Cape Town to try and change policies around mowing and the conservation of our parks. And this is the result. So these are some of our no-mow areas, where simply through passive rehabilitation, we have managed to allow the indigenous bulbs to create these absolutely amazing displays. And of course, it's not just the displays. These draw the pollinators draw the birds. And so we are slowly rehabilitating our areas. And these are some of the beauties which we have in across our various stepping stones that you will see if you come and visit us and do one of our wildflower walks. And in total at the moment, we are up to about 161 different plant species that we have recorded on iNat, and that's just among our volunteer group. Apart from the passive restoration, where we are simply trying to prevent the city from mowing and going in, weeding, creating space, we've also got active rehabilitation. So you can see within a period of simply 4 years, we've gone from, in this particular park, from this to this, which is obviously creating a much more diverse ecosystem and a more permanent showing than the seasonal bulbs. One of the important principles, and this has already been touched on by the other speakers, is that we really try to work according to the ecotype. What is locally indigenous to this particular area. And in some cases, it's not possible to restore what was, but we certainly do our best to propagate as much as we can. And ultimately, what we're aiming for are both ecologically and aesthetically appealing spaces for the people who live in the area, but also all of the wildlife. We are getting more sophisticated in our planning. So this is one of our park plans where you can see that in this particular instance, it's Swartlandshell Renosterveld in this park. And you can see we've got the different areas: scrub forest, vlei, Renosterveld shrubland, a seasonal spring flower area, and then a wildlife buffer. All of these that we are trying to get the neighborhood, the homeowners associations on board, and the city in terms of developing these. So this is our Magic Forest Garden, which you can see in development here, and you can see what it's starting to look like now in its first growing season.
It's a
full first growing season.
almost a year, yes.
Yeah. Leon Klug was involved in designing this for us, which we were very, very fortunate with, and it's a stunning showpiece in the Magic Forest. In terms of birds in our area, it's not our primary focus. As I say, we are sort of focusing on the base of the pyramid, if you will, looking at restoring the local flora, but with a view to bringing back the pollinators, bringing in the birds. And we certainly we need a lot more people to log species on iNaturalist. But some of the observations we have made is that we are certainly seeing a lot more recorded species in areas that have got wetlands or dams, of which, as you saw in one of those early slides, we have several in the area. We've got the Krepelboom Dam, the Kenridge Park, and also where we have a greater diversity of plant species. So that park I showed you just now, we reckon there's more than 100 species that are drawing birds in. And we've also observed how urban birds take refuge in some of our smaller stepping stones when the city does come in and mow. These stepping stones are already providing refuge for those birds. And these are some of the species in the area. If you can help us identify that nest, we can tell you what the plants are, but we're not sure exactly whose nest that is. So maybe someone could pop in the chat a guess at whose nest that is. But these are some of the species that we have recorded in the area. And, you know, there are many ways that people can get involved and assist with the project. So, as I say, we need local enthusiasts that can log the birds, and we actively log the plant species, the pollinators, and the amphibians. We have constant need for resources. As I said, we're a volunteer-driven project, so gardening equipment, gloves, information boards. We're busy trying to create more permanent and beautiful information boards for our areas. And then even things like stones for demarcation of our areas. We had a project last year where for the wildflower walk through our neighborhoods, we had local artists come together and they painted large boulders that we then placed all along the walk to show people where the walk went, and we created a map as well that people could go on the walk on their own if they weren't able to join one of our guided walks. We have various local WhatsApp groups, and then we have regular weeding, hacking, planting, cleaning sessions across our stepping stones. You can imagine it's quite a mission, keeping we've got 19 areas, and how many now? 29 areas that we're working in. But we do try to encourage local residents to adopt stepping stones and to spend some time working in their local stepping stones. So if you want to know more, here's where you can see, here's our Insta and Facebook pages. And this is just a view of the park in Kenridge Dam, which shows you how gratefully nature responds when you act to restore what is already naturally there. Thanks very much.
Yeah. We're gonna see if it's
Andre, anything from you?
Well, Francois is basically can I talk?
Yes.
Francois basically covered all the. Francois basically. Sorry, the sound is bad.
There must be a second device, just go out of it.
Mute on again.
Okay.
Okay. I think it will be better now.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Francois basically covered all the slides, so I don't have anything else to say. But the important thing that I can say is we are all volunteers doing it, and we started from base zero only a couple of years ago, and the growth we've had and the people that start to come and look at the stepping stones, the change in the people are using the parks more frequently, come and sitting in the parks where there previously was just mowed kikuyu, they now come and sit and enjoy it. And I can specifically talk about the park in front of my house. Previously, there was just mowed lawn and nothing more. And now, since we've got all that patch of renosterveld there, the birds have just come through in their numbers. Nothing rare, but they certainly like the environment, and you can definitely see how they are getting more and using the environment. Like that nest that Francois showed, it's got kapok bossy seeds that it used to make it softer for the eggs to be in. So they use it. So we can definitely try to use that in our gardens, in our parks, and make a difference. So it's possible. You don't have to be a scientist or a highly educated person in the field. You can actually do it if you're just a local citizen like me.
Oh, what a beautiful message. Thank you so much. I mean, one of the things I found so useful was for you to
Cherise,
say,
you're muted, I think.
no, I'm not muted.
No, that's right.
All good?
Yeah, all good.
I just wanted to say that one of the most interesting things that I picked up from your presentation was that the stepping stones to be roughly 500 meters apart. It was one of the things I've been wondering is how closely should we be trying to do things, because birds have a wider reach with their wings, but other animals and insects don't necessarily. So that was a very useful bit of information, and 29 areas. All I can think about is the weeding that you must be having to do. So let's hope people get involved. You're on the doorstep of so many, BOTSOC members and your renosterveld. One of the questions I asked, maybe you can't answer it now, but you could always answer maybe at the end of the presentation, was that because you have renosterveld is so fragmented and there's so little of it that's pristine that's left, I was imagining that possibly you would be able to do some sums to work out that if you continue with wildflower stepping stones, what percentage of renosterveld habitat could you have won back? It's much harder in bigger areas, but with your critically endangered vegetation type, it would be interesting that a projection to see that if you continued, how soon could you make a 2% or a 3% difference? That could be a fun thing to, and not just fun, important thing to add to your presentations. But thank you. And with you having spoken so beautifully about birds, thank you for winding it in, weaving it in to your presentation. I am going to invite Monique McQuillan to join us. Monique was with me at Kirstenbosch, and although she's a botanical horticulturist, she's always had this incredible passion for birds. And I thought that after all of this, you would like to know what you could do in your gardens to encourage birds not just to visit, but to stay. Monique, over to you.
So just making sure I'm unmuted. Everyone can hear me.
Yes, all good.
Thank you very much, Cherise. Yes, I've always had a passion for birds, and I get an absolute kick out of gardening for them as well. And this presentation is linked to a set of articles that I did for African Bird Life about a decade ago. So if you wanted to see or wanted to read the full length of it, I'm sure there'll be back copies, but I will try to get through this as fast as I can. It's a bit of an information overload, so I've tried to pare it down to the bare essentials and keep this as a focus on what birds need from us in a garden in order to kind of use it and keep it going. We've been hearing from all the various projects and the wonderful work they're doing. And as urbanization is falling across our landscape, it is definitely becoming an urgency that we are able to conserve these sort of natural areas, but also able to conserve spaces and utilize spaces that maybe aren't nature reserves. And one of those things is our home gardens. And sorry, my doesn't seem to move. Oh, sorry, my presentation's not moving.
Just use the arrows at the bottom, Monique.
Okay.
Right there at the bottom, or your keyboard.
Oh.
There you are.
There we go. It seems to be moving now. All right, we'll let it catch up to us. So yes, we can all contribute to conservation. We don't have to necessarily be restoring land. We can try and use our home gardens for this. The birds do play an essential part in the ecosystem of the garden. And the typical suburban garden as we know it, with clipped lawns and, you know, a little bit of round bushes around the edges, really aren't suitable. It'll always attract a few birds, but you won't really get the diversity and the sort of just the enjoyment out of the variety of birds that could visit your garden if this is the only garden that you have on offer. So although some of the planted gardens are attractive to avian life, we can do a lot more to bring them in. Most of the gardens are there to provide birds with what they need most to survive, and that would be food, water, and shelter. So I could say, well, how do we do that? The dedicated gardener can create a bird-friendly environment just by providing the essentials to attract multiple species of birds. A bird-friendly garden is quite a long-term project, but I must be honest, it's got very short-term positive results. And you don't actually need to have too much effort to accomplish it. The very first thing that we need to do is to assess your garden. So you need to go and take a look at what you've got in your garden. You can read up on them. I'm afraid I'm not going to give you all the answers tonight. This really is a lot of honor work on a dedicated gardener side. But to go through the garden, see what you've got in it. What plants are there? What do they offer birds? You know, do they have pollen? Do they have nectar? Do they have a fruit that's edible? So you really need to go through the garden and look at what you've got. You can then look at your entire design of the garden, and I'll speak a little bit about that next. But you can look at it and think about what you want in your garden. Identify various areas, things that you might think you want to have in your garden, and you then also need to look at the birds themselves. So become accustomed to what's in your area. Maybe do a little bit of research on what birds frequent your area. You might have the sunbirds, you might have the mouse birds, you might have a whole lot of different little robin chats, things like that will come. So it's good to know what birds are visiting or could potentially visit your garden, and also what they eat. You can then do a little bit of mix and match. You can do a little bit of research, and you can match your available plants with your local birds. And then the very big thing is to do research. Lots and lots of research on your plants. A lot of gardeners, and I think that's an entirely different talk, a lot of gardeners will very frequently go into a nursery and buy a whole bunch of plants. But then you come back and you don't really know what to do with them. So the best is to do a lot of research, the birds, research the plants, and research what the plants need in order to thrive as well. In total, a garden with seasonal offerings will guarantee that the birds visit year-round. And you can consider the added value of introducing bird-friendly indigenous plants. Indigenous plants are water-wise, they're adapted to the local climate, and they also attract the local birds because they'll recognize them as beneficial. So the main aspects of designing your garden, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's definitely that location. The bird-friendly environment may sound like a little bit of a daunting task, but it's quite fun to actually plan it. And in some ways, it will enlighten you as to why birds behave the way they do. So planting is an opportunity to get into your bird's daily routine and interact with them at their level, so to speak. The greater understanding of their needs and mannerisms is not only helpful to successfully attract them, but it will also be an invaluable skill when you're trying to spot them. If you're a birder and you want to go and see them, if you think like a bird, you'll probably find them. So the location of the garden in relation to undeveloped areas or maybe conserved land plays a huge role in the bird species that are likely to visit your garden. The larger properties, yes, have an advantage, as they'd be able to have more space to develop, but you shouldn't dismiss a small, quiet garden either. They definitely also have things to offer. So once you've assessed your current garden, you've taken note of what plants are available and their suitability for the plants, and you visited some nurseries, and you've familiarized yourself with plants on offer, you're now well armed with an arsenal of information to successfully plant your garden with appropriate plants. So you might ask, where in the garden should I plant? When planning the garden layout, you need to create areas which the birds will find attractive, yet you also want your garden to be, functional for yourself. So the best thing to do is to identify areas that are well used by the home inhabitants, such areas like patios or entertaining or well-used pool areas. These highly trafficked areas are not suitable for birds. They're obviously going to get spooked and flit off, and you won't really see much of them. But most gardens have a quieter area that's a little bit more peaceful, or you can create one. A relatively undisturbed area is where you should concentrate your efforts for attracting birds, and the visual accessibility of the bird haven, if you want to call it that, is also important, as you would like to enjoy watching them. There's no point in bringing them in if you can't actually then see them. So you can try and include the areas that can be sighted from your home, or you might have to have a handy pair of binoculars if your garden's particularly large. The typical residential garden with sort of the 1 meter bedding areas is filled with low shrubbery is not really that suitable. Wide, generously planted bedding areas with a variety of large shrubs will be a good place for them to sort of stop and look at things and have the feeling of safety while they observe their surroundings. So one would concentrate on deeper bedding areas, offering greater opportunity for diverse plantings. And ideally, I would say a good 5 meters is ideal, but obviously that's not possible for everybody. However, most of us have a corner in our garden that we like to garden, and you can create quite a bit of depth in the corner and get away with very low maintenance plants that will allow you to utilize the depth of that to make a safe space for birds. The other thing to consider is varying heights. You want a variety of heights and thicknesses of foliage, as these deeper sort of areas create a feeling of security for the birds. They've got some place to escape to. It's a very important thing for a bird, is they need to have escape. If you have concerns about large trees, perhaps shading your garden out if you've got a smaller garden. I used to have a very tiny garden in South Africa, but I found the joys of deciduous trees. They give you all the shade in summer and keep you nice and cool, but over winter they perfectly allow the light to come through into your garden, and it benefits with only losing leaves like once a season. You can also start talking with your neighbors and see if you can sort of link your gardens. I love the elevated green highways. It's a little bit like the ecological corridors. If gardens start working together, or you notice that your garden your neighbor might have a garden that's maybe a little bit wilder to yours, you can totally extend your garden to utilize theirs. So just think of it as one huge elevated green highway for the birds, and also other insects and amphibians, chameleons, all sorts of things will use these green highways. Once the birds come into your property, they will need to have a safe place out of predatory eyes. If you think like a bird, you're a morsel for just about everything. So you definitely want to feel secure, and you want to be able to feel like you can hide and watch, observe, and then get to a place where you feel you're safe, and then you can enter into the garden. So it's very important to have that place. It might be a nice high branch or a larger shrub with a little bit of good foliage to hide in. They really do need that feeling, and it's beneficial for the gardener because it usually is a very low maintenance shrub, something you don't have to hedge or trim or do too much work to. So there's always that as well. I do love a low maintenance garden. Less is more in my opinion. Other things that you can utilize in the garden are things like rocks and logs, stones. All of those things are very helpful. You'll find a lot of the birds will sort of perch on top of a rock in the lower setting. And they like to stop and observe. They're either looking for themselves, they'll have an eye up to the sky to see if there's anything to eat them, but they also use it as a perch to look for foraging. So they'll be looking for grubs and things in between the leaf litter. There are obviously most of us have lawn areas, the open areas, and there are birds that will come to those. Often you see the hardy-daws. You will have bigger species that need a bit of space to take off. Franklin and what will use these open spaces. They're not as shy, but you will also find that the smaller birds don't necessarily like to spend a lot of time in the open. So having those sort of shrubbery areas and canopy cover is where you're probably going to find most of the little flitty ones. So there's lots of little nooks and crannies in the home garden which can be used to draw the birds closer. Even those little spaces down the side of like the alleys downside homes, often you can keep that as a very quiet area. You can plant on the outside, and then you have the pleasure of watching birds use these through maybe one of your windows. Patio areas, things like that, you can often put up a fruiting climber, and the braver birds, especially like the white-eyes, they will come and feed right above your head in time. And watching their antics really is quite a pleasure for the home gardener. You get to know their personal individual personalities as well, and if you get regular visitors, they can get quite tame. One of the other essentials is water, and I must be honest, no bird-friendly garden is really without it. Water is essential to them, but it's also essential to gardening. So you will find that water is very captivating, and even if you just have a bowl of still water reflecting images or reflections, you can have floating flowers. These are all ways of creating a soothing, peaceful atmosphere in your garden. The sound of running water really relaxes and creates an appealing ambience. So, and you can also then use things like aquatic and marginal plants. These can be accommodated and displayed depending on the size and type of your water feature. Birds, however, they need water for drinking, obviously, but they also need it for regulating temperature. They use it for preening, and for some species, a refuge and place to feed. During preening, the water cleans off the dust and removes their loose feathers, parasites, and debris from the plumage. And birds really need their feathers to be immaculate to function well. Obviously, they rely on flight, and the flight is what keeps them safe. Aquatic species, some of the ducks or the waders, they all enter the water body to seek refuge from, say, like a dog or a cat. While larger wading species will use the shallows for hunting. So they might be hunting for amphibians or fish or anything else that might be a morsel in amongst their edges. The common sources of water in a garden include the basics. You get the bird baths, you get the ponds, the water features, you can get a stream or even a natural watercourse if you're very, very fortunate. But not all of these are designed to be bird friendly. So one of the things to consider is that the birds require very good footing and usually slow-moving and shallow areas where they can bathe. Often if you go through a wetland or a river setup, you can have a look, see how the wildlife use the water. And it's often in those quiet places where they can sort of dip in and dip out really quickly. Because at any time that a bird is either going for a drink or going to eat, any time that they've got their distraction or their attention away from looking out for predators, they're very vulnerable. So instinctively, they want to feel very secure. And if possible, the best siting for water would be somewhere close to this sort of escape route. These will be ideal. So you could have a nice little shallow pond or water feature in the corner near the edge of the garden where you can see them, but that they can also disperse and very quickly get out of danger if they need to. One of the quickest ways to let birds know that there's water in your garden is to make it audible. I always laugh at my mom-in-law's garden. She's got a pond, and if the water feature is off, there's lots of birds around, but there's not the whole cacophony of the whole flock coming in. And as soon as the water feature goes on, it's a little trickle, and suddenly there are white eyes everywhere. These little rooibekkies are in there, and they're splashing and bathing and making a huge mess. And it's just an absolute delight to watch. Shallow areas and marshy edges are perfect for marginal plants as well. So you can create habitats for birds as well as other wildlife. So you can include frogs and insects. And the marginal plants will also help to filter water naturally and remove excess nutrients caused by organic matter or fish. And so anyway, a healthy pond will attract many additional forms of wildlife along with birds, and the gardener and the wildlife benefit from a water feature. So it's a must for all nature-loving gardens. So one way to make sure that you're going to have birds in your bird-loving garden is that you provide sustenance. It's the primary drive for birds, and like us, a favorite restaurant will be proven and reliable. A restaurant that's proven and reliable would be used time and time again. Natural food sources are scarce in an urban setting, and if a home garden can offer an easy meal, it's more likely to see bird visitors stop for fast food, which was mentioned before, and this will top up their energy reserves. But the variety of bird species that will visit will largely depend on what is on offer and how often you offer it. So feeding wild birds is something that needs to be seriously considered, as you can influence the bird's natural behavior and their foraging habits. And birds will very, very quickly become dependent on your generosity. So you've got to consider, will you be able to offer a healthy, varied diet year-round? Most of us, to be honest, can't. But the best way to approach that feeding is to offer a natural diet by using your garden. And that way the plants will offer them seasonal variety and options, and offering the majority of their diet naturally is an ideal situation, as will encourage the birds to become reliant on your garden for food and not on an artificial feeder. The best way for you to do this is to determine what is missing from the natural menu. So have a look in your garden. This is one of the things I love about gardening for birds, is that you can do it as an ongoing project. You can see different times in the year when the birds are maybe not as active and there's something missing. Maybe you don't have a particular plant that's flowering, or something's not seeding, there's not a fruit in the garden. And then you can go and look for that plant. You can go find the plant that will bring a larder into your garden, and it will be able to provide the birds with something during the lean times. If there is perhaps not something that you can offer, there's not a suitable spot in your garden, then you can do supplemented feeding, but it does require quite a bit of commitment. It is best to keep to a routine and to be as consistent as possible, because birds have a very they're creatures of habit, really. So they will come to you almost every single day at the same time if they know that's when you feed. The seed eaters are easy to accommodate, and local stores do offer a good variety of seed blends. The sign of a very good seed for birds would be one that has a good variety of different seeds. Often, much like all of us, if there's one particular thing that we like the most, we all like that little purple sweet in the box of chocolates, then we will take all the purple ones first. And the birds are exactly the same. If there's a particularly sweet or junk food seed in the seed, they will take just that. And they can be quite picky. But if a lot of seed or varieties offered, they will get a much better rounded nutrition. The frugivores, so the ones that eat the fruits, are also quite easy to offer to. You can give them seasonal fruits. They love oranges and pears, papaya, banana, apples. These are all very easy to offer. I often used to just cut them in half and stick it on a branch or a spike. You don't even have to have a feeding platform. And the birds will quite happily come and take it from there, and they feel safe because they're in the trees. A lot of birds will also take very finely chopped vegetables, so peas, carrots, kale, even couscous they like to have. And these are not, I would say they're not bad, but I wouldn't give them large volumes of it, mostly just because it can spoil quite easily. There are nectar options for birds. I'm not very pro it. Much like was mentioned earlier, it can become a little bit of a sugar rush. So it is best to offer them through natural means using plants. During the very, very leanest times, you can use the suets or the bird puddings. There are different recipes for these, but these really should just be for the darkest, deepest, coldest nights of winter, because they can be very fattening to the birds. Lastly, when it comes to feeding, is just to always double check that what you're feeding the birds is bird safe, because not all birds, not all foods that are used by humans are suitable for birds. Definitely avocado is one of those things. It's quite toxic to them. We shouldn't overfeed our wild birds, but that's only because the food can spoil on the feeding stations. And if we overfeed them and they don't finish the food quite quickly, it'll also start luring a lot of the unwanted critters, which a lot of us don't like at all. So the food that is on offer should be put out for a while, and before it goes off, it should be taken away. It's very important that the hygiene of the bird feeders are very well looked after. So, from time to time to give the feeders a very good clean as well, because a lot of bird diseases are sort of passed along between colonies that way. The best place to put the feeders is obviously in a place that the birds feel safe. That's an ongoing trend. The less traffic the area, it's probably going to be more likely that you'll get a lot more birds that are going to be brave to approach it. But again, as I said, a lot of birds will overcome their fear for food. And then feeding is a very good time to observe them, and you can actually get a really good chance at observing not only the birds, so you can identify who's coming to your garden, but also identify how they interact with each other. You might see that there's some really pushy birds, and they will push off the smaller ones. Then if you want to then bring the smaller birds into your garden, you might have to provide a secondary feeding station, maybe one that is not accessible to bigger birds, or on a very thin-leafed plant, so that only small weighted birds would be able to access it, and the bigger birds, like the doves often, which will crowd out the smaller birds, the doves won't be able to reach it, and that way you'll be able to offer it to everybody. Then we go back to the garden. The best way for us to not only bring the birds, but to keep them into our garden is to create a thriving ecosystem. And ideally, we need to understand what a healthy ecosystem is to start with. So we've got to understand the natural cycles of growth, decay, and recycling of energy, and what parts the organisms that we have in our garden play in that. Because each organism has a part to play and contributes to the cycle. And if we disrupt that cycle, we then interrupt the ability for the ecosystem to be thriving and sustainable. You can think of a tree. One tree could be an entire ecosystem. It would sustain life from birds up in nests down to its roots and the organisms that live underground. That entire organism is sustaining life. And that's what we're trying to do in gardens. Just, on a slightly bigger scale or smaller scale, depending on your garden. So our good gardening principles include obviously a gentle, meticulous approach and consideration to the natural cycles. But the obvious things like eco-friendly practices, using no chemicals, those sort of things are fairly obvious. Mulching, leaving leaf litter, composting, those things are all fantastic to do. There are other things to consider as well. The urban gardeners can be, you can use your organic low impact solutions, but not all our problems are necessarily problematic at all. So one of the things that I've noticed over the years of gardening as well as loving to garden for birds is that there is an ecosystem equilibrium. And when a pest arrives, say an aphid, we've got an aphid infestation, often we will go and find something to spray the aphids. But we haven't given nature or the system time to respond to the pest as we see it, because it's not really a pest. To the garden, it's an opportunity. So here we have an infestation of aphids, and we now have an opportunity to invite birds into our garden to eat them. Ladybirds to come and eat them. There's a host of other insects that will come and eat them. And along with that, you will then get the birds that eat insects. So we've got this whole system going. And if you leave a pest problem long enough, for a few, most have a solution that is provided by nature. So the best thing to do is to leave it be. Less is more. We as gardeners, I think, just need to be more patient. We need to be more patient and understand what's around us instead of just going in full steam ahead and making nature. We should let nature happen around us. So lastly, I think it's the feather in the cap, so to speak, is if you have created a garden that is attractive, that is sustainable, that sustains the birds that need to feed. And it's a complete honor if they then decide to use it to nest and to rear their young. Nesting may occur high in trees and canopies, nestled amongst the dense foliage in the hedges. They'll use thick creepers along the sides of walls, clumps of grass even or even a hollow scratched in the ground if you've got something like a thickneep or like a plover. They will use your garden. They're very much an opportunist. Any location that has got thorns, I think the birds often like that because they will provide a nest in a thorny thicket where they know they're going to be quite protected from things like cats. Unfortunately, it is a major predator in an urban setting. We've got cats and dogs and also squirrels. But birds are very adaptable and they will make use of building structures, telephone poles, artificial nesting boxes can be used. They're very much an opportunist when it comes to creating spaces for young. Here in the UK, you often see them in letterboxes, even between bricks. It's crazy how birds will make a nest out of just about anything. Usually the males select the site and the hen then gets wooed and the male will have to decide how best to woo his hen. The hens can be quite picky and poor weaver birds, they I think have to make multitudes of nests before the hen is satisfied with exactly how good it is. But we can offer them some help along the way. And there are natural ways of doing that as well. Although your garden as such will provide a lot of nesting material with twigs and grasses, the wild rosemary, I think was mentioned in the other presentation, that's used to line the birds nesting to make it nice and soft and warm. We can also do things like adding feathers, so feather pillows. If you've got no more use for them, you can put a little bit of the feathers out. They absolutely adore those. You can put out coir, natural raw cotton, moss, lichen, dried soft grasses. All these things are very suitable for the birds, but try stay away from using any artificial materials. Like even wool can be very bad for the birds, or long hair. They get wrapped around little babies' legs and constricts the flow of blood, and they eventually lose their feet. So it's not ideal. Rather let the birds do the building if you can. So, sorry. Although most established gardens can offer plenty of natural nesting sites, artificial nest boxes are useful in a young garden or in the case of specialized nesting requirements, which probably are lacking in urban settings. So if you provide artificial nest boxes, try to determine what local bird you would like to use them and then put them up accordingly. Many varieties are available for local garden shops, but some specialist pet stores can offer you some creatively constructed boxes, so to speak. Open nesters such as robins or wagtails may accept a partially open box, but other creatures, well, other birds like cuckoos and barbets, they're cavity breeders, so they actually like a hollowed out log, and they will use those to nest in. Nest must be well placed, out of reach of predators, obviously, preferably out of disturbance or areas which are quite well frequented by people, and then also out of the full day of sun. Otherwise, the nests overheat and basically cook the little babies alive. The joy of having an artificial nest box is that you have the opportunity to sometimes put in remote cameras, nest cams, and that way you get to enjoy another level of birding in your garden. Nest boxes, if you do put them up, you just need to check every now and then that their bees haven't taken up residence in them, because they do quite like nest boxes as well. You can deter bees by putting a very sharp-smelling detergent in, something like Jay's fluid. If you wash it out with that, generally the bees won't set up shop, but birds actually have a really, really bad sense of smell generally, so they don't mind. So lastly is that the baby birds, the fledglings as such, they need a very soft place to land. If your rearing is successful, you've now supplied a lot of food and the parent birds are incredibly happy, you then have a lovely clutch of birds that land once they've jumped out of the nest. Ideally, if you have a way to keep them safe, is very, very important, because these parents' birds have now gone through a lot of energy to rear these babies. They land on the ground and then get eaten by something. So again, the foliage comes into play. If you've got an area that's very nice and dense, they can hide in that. Fledglings often are very silly for the first few days. They'll come out and they can't fly particularly well. And it's usually when people pick them up. But if you're able to provide them a safe place in the garden, or just a leg up and put them on a branch, they'll probably be safe. And before you know it, they'll be flying around with parents. The cycle of seasonal change and growth and life will continue to reveal themselves in a healthy garden ecosystem. And as the seasons pass, the gardener's life too will be enriched, and many hours of toil will be repaid when you can sit and watch your birds. They do bring an entire different level to your garden, which is totally fun. And I do encourage you to take up gardening for the birds. I have the next few slides. I know we're running out of time. I'm going to go through them rather quickly. They are the options that you have for gardening for the birds. I have provided the list for what I'm going to show you, so you don't have to worry about that. They will either have in the chat or on the website. You'll be able to go and have a look at that. But I wanted you to be able to get a quick overview of a year's worth of plants that are available for your garden. So there really is no excuse as to why we can't garden for the birds. So starting round about now, you can see we're going into winter. There's some beautiful oranges and purples, things that you'll be able to go into your garden right now. You've got to love the aloes. They definitely are an extremely popular feed for a lot of the nectar feeders. So the sunbirds would love them, and they're hardy and tough and will handle our very, very hot summers. Then June and July, we're going into lighter tones, maybe a little bit colder months. But again, there's something on offer for everybody. You'll have nectar. You'll have the melianthus, the white eyes love those in particular. You've got the strelitzia, which is actually a flower that's been, it's evolved to be pollinated by birds. And it's, it's fascinating to watch, actually. I won't go into too much detail. yeah, so you've got all sorts of wonderful things. There's long lists of plants, as you can see. There's more than enough for you to add into your garden. It will bring you life throughout the year. So going into September, October, and this would obviously be your springtime. There is loads on offer, lots of things for both birds and insects and wildlife alike. A little bit of nectar as well as seed opportunities. So things like the Optotus, the birds will come for all the seed later on. And we've got a lot of fruit and a lot of larder plants, should we say, in summer. This is the height of the breeding season when birds are at their hungriest and need to have food on hand very quickly to feed those hungry mouths. A lot of these plants are not just food, they'll also be sources of nesting or security. So all these lists of plants that are available to you, you can decide if any of them are suitable for your garden. We have the sages, again, very well loved by the nectar lovers. With the sages, a quick trick is to note that you've got the long tubular flowers. Those with very little bit of a lower lip are generally nectar for the birds. The ones with very big broad petals below are usually food for bees because it provides them a landing zone. So it's quite quick and easy to tell the difference between those that are good for insects and those which are good for birds. So this would take us full circle to the end of an entire year in the garden. As you can see, if I've not lost pictures, I've not been able to put even near enough pictures into to really showcase what's available for a garden. So I'm very sure there's something for everybody in there. A little bit of every color, a little bit of every shape and size. It's something us as gardeners, we just need to go do our homework and see what we like most, where we want to put it, how we're going to use it, and see how it would benefit the birds at the end of the day. So now is really the perfect time to begin gardening for the birds. Winter's an excellent time to take stock of your garden and plan for the next season. Time spent gaining information on plant selection and suitability will be a worthy investment to the lasting success of any garden. The choice of plant species can establish which birds visit your garden and how often you can expect them. And that brings us to the conclusion of this presentation. Hopefully it was quite useful, and I'm really glad to see the efforts that everyone is going through to provide for birds and ecosystems in Cape Town and the rest of the country, of course.
Thank you, Monique. Very difficult, I know, to download all your years of bird knowledge into a short period of time to share the possibility of others having success attracting and keeping birds in their garden. There were lots of tips and tricks in there. And thank you so much, all the way from the Isle of Man, and beautiful picture you sent us there. We really appreciate your input. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
And to all the participants and the presenters, thank you for all the time and effort it takes you to put a presentation together and to spend all this time with us presenting, being so passionate about your projects. All of you have this educational, community and conservation message that makes us all feel positive and proud about what is going on in our biodiversity pockets. So thank you to everyone for their hard work and for attending this evening. Until next time, cheers everybody. Good luck with the winter.